Hello everybody and welcome back to another video on the channel. I do apologize if my voice sounds a little strange. I am currently going through a bit of a cold. The Resident Evil franchise is often regarded as the best of survival horror, and from the games that I have played it certainly seems so. I was introduced to this series a few years ago, back when I was on PS4. The first game I played was Resident Evil 7. Now I wouldn't really recommend this game as the first, especially to someone like me who was around 12 to 13 when I played this. Resident Evil 7 is widely known as the scariest game in the franchise. In fact, I think people would argue that this may be one of the scariest games of all time, not just the Resident Evil series. I was only around half an hour to an hour into the game before I stopped playing. I don't even remember why I played this game or how I got access to it in the first place. But nevertheless, this was my first Resident Evil game. Fast forward a couple of years and now I have played Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 2, the 2019 version. I do also have Resident Evil 3 but I have not played that yet. Now you see, playing Resident Evil 4 after playing Resident Evil 7 is quite a shock to the system. Resident Evil 7 being pretty much purely just horror, barely any action sequences, and Resident Evil 4 being pretty much purely action with certain horror segments throughout the game. For this video I want to primarily focus on Resident Evil 2, the 2019 version. I have to say that Resident Evil 2 does a good job of being sort of like the middleman in between these two games. It does a good job in terms of balancing the horror and the action, although I would say it is more horror than action. I have not played the original Resident Evil 2, but from what I've heard, this game does a very good job at staying true to the original, in addition to this classic horror game being modernized and improved. The updated graphics for this game are phenomenal, very detailed environments and terrifying. I've heard someone mention before that the character designs were quite uncanny and kind of uncomfortable to look at during the cutscenes, but I have to completely disagree with that, as I think the character design is amazing. Very detailed, and all the cutscenes are super clean and well rendered. This is because the cutscenes are actually rendered in the game's engine, meaning it will match your frame rate and flow seamlessly in between gameplay. This makes for a very immersive experience as there are no loading screens in between the cutscenes. There is a constant storm around Raccoon City as you are trapped inside the police station. Not only does this help make up the great atmosphere, but it also distracts the players from noises that they need to be hearing. For some reason, all the lightning and thunder and the rain pattering on the windows makes up for such a tense environment. It sort of constantly gives you the feeling that you are in danger and that you are not safe, which you aren't, meaning it becomes quite difficult to explore the establishment in a calm manner. You never really want to have a rest in between moving down, and you never want to stay in the same location for a long period of time. Some of the enemy types, such as the Lickers and the Ivies, look absolutely disgusting. I have to be honest and say it's been a while since I've seen such great character designs. The Ivy with their disturbing misplaced jaw and elongated body parts, and the Lickers with their abnormally long tongue, their exposed brain and their massive claws. And it definitely does not help that these guys can be on the ceiling and the walls as well as the floor. Just the normal zombies by themselves look great. And this is all without talking about the main man himself, Mr. X. He is just an absolute tank of a unit walking around constantly just trying to terminate you. In fact, not only are these enemy designs great, but so are the main protagonists, Claire and Leon. They both have quite unique outfits as well as weapons. But enough on a graphical standpoint of the game, as we've already established that it is quite good. I wanted to dedicate some time in terms of discussing the sound design for this game. It is absolutely chilling and really helps stack on top of the horror environment. This game contains excellent ambient sounds, effects and voice acting. Directional sounds also featuring binaural audio for a better realism. They deliver excellent quality that contributes immensely to the immersion. Of course, all of the jump scares in this game are based off the basis of audio. I think that one great example of this can be the windows. Even if you've boarded up these suckers, you can still get jump scared quite a bit. You see, once you return into close proximity of these windows, a zombie will lash out against the barricade, making an awful lot of noise. Whilst this is quite a minute detail, every time I return to certain locations, this never fails to get me. Three-dimensional sound also adds quite a bit to the immersion and the horror. One really cool and interesting aspect of the game is there never is really much of a soundtrack, especially not in the Raccoon City police station. 90% of the game literally just sounds like this. Quite unsettling and horrifying, isn't it? Well, this is what you have to work with throughout the game. Just your footsteps, your weapons, and the enemy. Now to talk a little bit about the gameplay. Overall, it is safe to say that the game is categorized into 3 major segments, this being exploration, management, and combat. Exploration is performed with a 3D person visual featuring mouse-based aiming, sprinting and walking, and plenty of interactions with the environment such as using specific tools to open pathways, barricaded windows, opening lockers, and containers. Attention to detail and backtracking are a fundamental part of the game, as many areas will only be accessible and more tools and keys are gathered, so going back to already explored places is actually quite meaningful, even if sometimes optional, as it often leads to great rewards for those willing to risk it. I believe that managing your resources is a fundamental mechanic in pretty much any survival horror, but especially in RE2. Inventory space, especially at the beginning of the game without any expansions, is very limited, so either going back often to stash items or optimizing your resources wisely is always needed. Combining certain herbs, ammo stacks, gunpowder, and discarding certain items is something you will do very often. Throughout the majority of the game, you will come across a global stash. From what I know, you can put infinite amount of items here to store as well as take them out in the future. Think of it as sort of an ender chest that you would find around the map. One key thing is that balancing the loadout in ammo, healing items, and weapons is important, and doing it wrong can lead to not having enough space for critical items. And without these critical items, you will not be able to progress through the story. Now I think it's time to touch a little bit on the combat system. Combat in RE2 is tactical, pretty much slow pace, and based upon accuracy, preparation, and knowing each enemy's skills and weaknesses. Strangely enough, the best defense is actually just to stay out of combat. That's right, because if you were to try and kill all the enemies, you would run out of ammo very quickly. This will leave players defenseless and doomed in case of mandatory fights. Instead, be careful in terms of planning out your routes and engagements, as it is vital to save up spare resources for when they truly matter. Still, when it comes to it, each weapon has a good and diverse feeling to it. While enemies react beautifully to shots in a shower of gore most of the time, enemies are considerably tougher than most of nowadays games, more so games of this genre, survival horror. So beware. This might seem at a con at first, but once understanding the game's concept, it becomes a good side of it. Lastly, the story in RE2 is divided into 2 parallel campaigns, and its lore is narrated via pieces of information found scattered around, such as cutscenes and dialogues of various characters. The narrative is solid, decently written, and engaging from start to end. All characters have strong defined personalities and are interesting as well. Considering story is not usually the strong point of the Resident Evil series, this one is pretty decent. In conclusion, this is one of the best survival horror games I've played in recent times. A very immersive, engaging, and terrifying experience, polished from top to bottom. In conclusion, if you have not played this game, I would definitely recommend you to check it out, especially if you're a big fan of the Resident Evil series. Well guys, I guess that's it for me today. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.